My name is Michael Niksic, and yes, I am a chef. And this is my assistant, Frankie. Don't mess with Frankie. Boy's been around the block a few times. He's my right-hand man. Today we're going to be doing challah, and we're going to be checking out not only the traditional version, egg version, but we're also going to be doing a cinnamon and raisin version. We're going to be rolling it out and putting it together in two different versions, two different ways. And we're also going to be doing my version of pigs in a blanket, something that you can basically use for tailgating, barbecues, watching a football game at home, if there are football games this year, and pretty much any other type of movie experience that you may have in your home. So, we're about to begin our menu right now. Okay, we are going to make bread, and in particular, we're going to be making challah, egg bread. Slightly sweet. It's going to have some honey in it, a little bit of sugar. And what we're doing is we're going to first start with putting our yeast, which has already been dissolved, in water and the sugar. Warm water, 2 ounces, is the recipe called for. And we're going to raise our machine up to its top level and begin to turn it on so it starts to stir. Next, we're going to add our water and our honey that's been dissolved and our oil. Now we're going to let the dough hook do the mixing nice and slow. The oil gives the bread elasticity, which makes it easier to handle when it comes time for us to get it ready to not only proof, but also too for the actual final form that we're going to put it in. Now we're going to do 2 loaves today with this particular class, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a traditional version and we're going to do a cinnamon version with dried fruit. Now that the water is in and the honey's in, we're adding our egg yolks. And we're going to let our machine mix this up. Now you'll be able to see, when we lower the bowl, that everything in here is pretty well mixed up. And now that it's completely thoroughly blended as much as possible for now, we're going to start to add our flour. And we're going to do that slowly but surely, and then once again, we're going to let the machine do the work for us. Now as we're putting the flour in, it's calling for 4.5 cups of flour. We're going to do this by starting out with 2.5 cups. And our 5th one. Whoop. Empty that. Now we're not sifting the flour and we're not packing it, we're just filling the cup. That's a little baker's trick where we take the edge of the bowl and lift it just slightly so it can hook onto the flour on the upsides and mix it in more thoroughly and more evenly. Now, one of the keys to doing this is to make sure that everything is warm. Your water is warm, the Honey is warm. Everything is warm. Not hot, just warm. Even the bowl is warm. Ran some hot water into the bowl so that it can be warm too. Since we have air conditioning on, we certainly don't want the bowl to be cold. And what this does is it facilitates the rising of the yeast. Now when you're putting your ingredients together, you don't want to put the salt with the yeast initially, because the salt can kill the yeast. That's why we dissolve the sugar with the yeast initially. Now you can see how the dough is grabbing and starting to become more glutinous, let's say. And it's going to start pulling the remnants of the dough that's on the sides of the bowl into the center. So it becomes one lump, basically, where the dough hook needs it. You can see how slowly but surely the remnants of the dough are coming off the sides of the bowl. Now if it doesn't get much more clean, we're going to add just a little bit of flour to this, because it seems like the dough might be just a little bit wet. So we'll do that right now. I added about 2 tablespoons of flour, so we'll see how that works. Now remember, you always add any flour to this to dry it out in very small increments. You can always add more when you're using small increments. You never want to try and do it all at once. It doesn't work well if you try that. And we'll let this drop down. And how about that? We got ourselves a nice moist dough. And we'll move the camera over. You can see the inside of the bowl is nice and clean. Okay, we're going to get a bowl ready for our dough so we can proof it. We have a proof cycle on our oven, so we're going to use that. This way it'll be out of the way for future projects. And basically what we're going to do is we're just going to oil the inside of the bowl. Don't worry about any extra oil in here. It's not going to be a big deal because we actually want that. We're going to take our dough that we just got done taking out of the mixer, and we're going to put it in here. And we're going to roll it around and make sure that it's covered with the oil. This will help with the proofing process because it won't stick to the bowl. It'll just come up naturally by itself and there'll be less resistance. So this is a good solid method to use. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cover this with plastic and we're going to pop it into the oven and we'll be all set and ready to rock and roll. We're going to do this one more time for our second loaf and then we're going to start baking. Now this has to rise to twice its size, which means it's going to come up to about here. And then we're going to punch it down, put it in its final form, which in this case, for this loaf, it's going to be a braided cake. And then the next one that we make with our cinnamon and with our dried fruits, we're going to make that one into an actual loaf, but we're going to roll it out and we're going to fill it. So we're going to have 2 different methods with the same recipe and 2 different outcomes. All right, now we're going to roll out our challah. Our challah is literally twice its size, which is exactly what we want. And we're going to take this and look how nice and clean and easy that comes out of the bowl. Put it onto our tabletop. Dispose of our bowl. And we're going to literally take this and fold it. We're going to roll it in flour so we have minimal problems with any type of sticking when we roll this out. Okay. We're going to use plenty of flour. Don't be cheap with flour. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to roll this out into a sheet. This is a very unnatural for challah, but that's okay, because what we're about to do is a little bit different from what challah would normally be done. You can see how it shrinks up a little bit? Okay, that's normal. And before we finish what we're going to do here, we're going to let it shrink and contract some before we roll it up into our final form. We pick it up, we let it shrink a little bit and get back to where it was. Like I said, we don't want to overwork the dough by rolling it over and over and over again. So you want to be to the point. I'm going to square this off so that this way we get the best shape possible, which in this case is going to be rectangular. Okay, we're in pretty good shape. Alright, now we're going to get rid of all this extra flour because we certainly don't need it. And this is going to be the interior of the loaf of bread. Move this back. Wipe off any extra flour, get it out of the way, because we don't need it. And same here. And get this out of the way. You can see these little shards are from the extra oil that was in the pan as this was proofing. It's not a big deal. Just take that and pull them out of our way. Okay. Now this has had a couple of minutes to shrink back and contract. And now we're ready for the show. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this mixture, and this is cinnamon and brown sugar and butter. And we're going to literally spread this all over the sheet. Now we're not going to spread it really thick, but we are going to make sure that we cover as much as possible. And you can use pretty much any type of a spatula for doing this. Okay. We're going to go almost to the edges, but not quite. It doesn't matter if you do get a little spilled over here and there. It's not going to make a difference. Next, we're going to add currants. The currants, we soaked these in literally our currant white wine, dessert wine, that we bought when we were out in Oswego at their wine festival. And so these have had overnight to soak. They're nice and moist, no extra liquid. And we're going to sprinkle these all over the sheet. And try and even them out as best as possible. Okay. And we have California white raisins, and we soaked these in apple cider. And again, nice and moist. They'll stay nice and moist when this baking process is done. We don't want to put them in dried, because if we put them in dried, they're going to come out hard and dried, and they're not going to be anywhere near as enjoyable. And we want this to be as enjoyable as possible. So, here we go. Then we used about a cup of each, because we're being extravagant. And we're going to spread everything out. Now, like I say, you don't have to have this perfect. It's not a problem if it's not perfect. We're going to wipe our hands off, and then we're going to start the process. Now you can see what we're up to. Okay. I'm going to literally roll this up into a log. In the ends, we're going to pinch a little bit. Now whenever you're moving the dough around, do it smoothly, not too fast, not too slow. Don't hesitate. When you hesitate, that's when you have problems. And next on this list, actually we're going to get another piece of paper here. Okay, now you're looking at this pan and you're looking at the loaf, and the loaf looks to be a couple inches too long for the pan. That's correct, but it still will fit on this pan because we're going to do this. Now this goes into our proofing oven one more time, and it proofs a second time, again to twice the size, and then I'll be ready for the oven. And now you have a cinnamon butter challah with raisins and currants in it. Very seasonal, very topical, excellent year-round product. Great for breakfast, great for brunch. Excellent holiday side dish. This time when we send it into the proofing oven, we certainly can't put this into a bowl and cover it with plastic. So we're going to loosely drape the plastic over it and then put it into our proofing oven. Remember, our proofing oven is only going to be about 105 to 110 degrees, so it's going to have absolutely no effect on the plastic whatsoever. And also, too, when it comes out, we'll literally be able to peel this right off. This will keep the exterior from drying out during the proofing process. Now, during the proofing process, we are going to have water in the oven, but this is just a little safety precaution to make sure that the exterior of our dough, once this bread is baked, is going to be nice and moist, and it's not going to be hard and crusty and a little crunchy, because we're really not going for that effect. We're going for a soft loaf. Okay. Now the first loaf of challah that we did with the cinnamon butter and the raisins and the currants, we floured and rolled it out. This time we are not, because we're going to make a more traditional version of challah. So we're going to just drop it right in place, get our bowl out of here. We're going to literally pick this up and we're going to cut this into 3 pieces. There we go. There's 1, 2, and 3. Come on, cut, baby. There you go. A little bit wet and sticky, but we're okay. And one of the things, well, we are going to use a little flour, but not much. And what we're going to do is we're going to wipe off some of this excess oil from the bowl. And dab off any extra that's on the dough. We're good. And we're just going to do a little bit of flour, not much. That's all we're going to need. And we're going to take this dough and we're going to roll it into equal and even in lengths as much as possible. Okay, that's 1. Here's 2. A touch more flour, do the job. I'm going to fold it over and we're going to roll it out, literally by hand. Don't worry about it being exactly even, because since we can move the dough around just like we did the last loaf, we can adjust it. Alright, and we're going to do the same thing here. And we've got 3 relatively even pieces. Now if you want them specifically perfectly even, you can weigh each piece. That's certainly not a problem. Okay, now we're going to get these a little closer. We're going to, oops. Switch our angle here. And there we go. There we go. And we pick it up. We move it around in the other direction. And then, one more time. All right. Oops. Now at this point in time, you flip it over to the opposite side. And you continue. We shorten this up so we even it out. Fold it in underneath. Okay. And I'm going to take a piece of baking paper and roll it right onto the baking paper. And like so. Take this end piece, fold it in, and you're all set and ready to rock and roll. Now at this point in time, you can either egg wash it or not. We're going to go with not and put it straight into the proofing oven. And also too, when it comes out, we'll egg wash it, and then if I can find the sesame seeds that I've been looking for the last day, I'm going to put sesame seeds all over it, and we're going to toast it with sesame seeds. And then we're going to have 2 loaves of challah coming out of the oven. And the best way to eat challah when it comes out of the oven is fresh salted butter. This is our cinnamon bread, and we've got it literally egg washed, ready for the oven. No extra pooling of oil, melting from the butter that was inside of it. That way we don't have any problems with frying. We're ready to rock and roll. 2 times its original size. All is a go. Okay, our traditional challah is out of the oven. And now that it's ready to cool off, well, it still has heat from coming out of the oven, we're going to brush the outside of it with a cold stick of salted butter. And as we brush it, just the surface layer of the butter will melt onto the challah and give it a nice buttery exterior and a nice gloss. And we're all set. Just like that, it's done. You can tell when bread like this is finished by looking at the bottom. The bottom is a nice golden brown, so that tells us that the bread is done. And there you go, finished product. Anybody can do this recipe. You don't need a bread machine. If you have a bread machine, it makes it a little bit easier for you maybe, but like I say, it's not necessary. And once this cools off enough, we're going to be putting a knife to it and putting some fresh butter to it. Them's eating. Here's our second loaf out of the oven. This is the one that has our currants and raisins in it, and our cinnamon butter. You can see how it's swirled, and we're going to do the same thing with it. We're going to literally run this raw stick of butter up and down the sides of it and give it a nice buttery coating. And we're done. Simple as that. We'll let this cool off, and we're going to have some serious breakfast bread. Excellent for French toast. Excellent for just about any type of munching that you have in mind. Doesn't matter if it's a Jewish holiday or a Christian holiday. Does not matter. This is really great stuff. Perfect for many, many, many different ethnic groups. Greek, Polish. Totally up to you. This suits the purpose for what you're doing for the holidays. Absolutely, by all means, go for it. You won't regret it. And here's an internal shot of our raisin and currant cinnamon challah bread. Sorry I can't share it with you, but trust me, I'll make it up for you. I'll have an extra portion. Now get to it, man. Start making your own version of this. Okay, we are going to make an appetizer, and we are going to make pigs in a blanket. And we're going to start with puff pastry. This is an entire package of puff pastry, which is basically one sheet, 18 inches by 12 inches. That's a standard puff pastry sheet, not only in the restaurant business, but also too in retail packs. Now, if you're going to be rolling out dough, what I always recommend is you have yourself a really good rolling pin. It should spin like this because of the bearings on the inside. This rolling pin is 35 years old, battle tested in many restaurants, many pastry shops. And it's nice and heavy. Also, too, when you look at the grip, as far as your hand goes, when you're running it across the table and rolling something out, your knuckles aren't dragging. Key. You want the rolling pin to do the work for you. So you want a heavy rolling pin that spins freely. This way you're not pushing on the dough, no matter what the dough is, and pressing on it and tearing it and stretching it out. This way you're actually working the dough and stretching it out naturally by using the weight of the rolling pin first and foremost. Now, not only do we have the dough on the table floured, but we're also going to flour the rolling pin as well too. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to roll this sheet out, and then we're going to place our ingredients on the inside. So here we go. Now you'll see that each time I do this, I'm going to turn the dough in different directions. And if I needed to go in a different direction to square off, because we want this in as best a rectangular shape as possible so that we can get the most portions out of each sheet. Okay, you can see how it's starting to take shape. You apply pressure evenly, in and away, in and away. And if we need corners or centers straightened out, right like so. And again, you maintain your general shape. Okay, we're going to set that down for a moment. You can see we've used up our flour. Our flour is actually our lubricant. So we want some more flour there. When we're done rolling this out, we'll just brush it right off. So don't worry about having too much flour on it. It's not a big deal. Okay. And we're going to go a little bit further on this. Puff pastry is layers of dough with shortening in between each layer, or depending on who you've gotten the dough from, butter. And that is what happens when the dough rises. It's basically because the shortening in between the layers gets hot to the point where it steams the dough. It activates the moisture inside the dough. That moisture steams and it creates the layers in between what we know now is puff pastry. So say for example, if you go and you get a French dessert like a Napoleon, that's puff pastry. It's got all the extra layers in between it. And those layers are caused by taking the dough, having shortening in between each layer, folding the dough over, rolling it out, folding the dough over, rolling it out. It creates the extra layers. Now we just did that again by not rolling this out in a flat sheet. We took it right out of the package, so it was actually folded in three when we started with this. And so we're going to have a really nice rising effect with what we're doing. Now if you're not sure if this has been rolled out evenly, take your hand and go across the dough like this. And your feel will tell you on a hard surface how thick it is. And it'll let you know if you've got any high spots and low spots. We're in pretty good shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to square it off just a little bit. Like so. And that's going to give us a little better rectangular form to work with. And we'll wipe off our extra flour on the top and get this away from the sides. So we don't need this. Flour will bake off as flour. It's not going to change. So you don't want to have the flour in there for that reason. And you can see we don't need this extra flour, so we get rid of it. A puff pastry is used for a lot of things. It can be used for the tart shell for a fruit tart. It can be used for beef Wellington. It can be used for making what's called bouchées, which are basically little stuffed shells. So depending on how it's configured and who's using it, it's depending on what's going to be on the inside. You can put all sorts of fillings in here. It doesn't have to be sweet like we're doing. Well, semi-sweet since we're doing pigs in a blanket. And I'll get to that semi-sweet part in a second. Okay, we're in great shape. Now what we're going to do is we're going to size it up and see how many we got. Like so. We're going to give ourselves a little bit at each end. So we know we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe 5 if we squeeze a couple in on the ends. Okay. So we'll take this and get it to the side. And we're going to come back and we're going to do our ingredients next. And what we're going to do is, I'll remove that and get back to it in a second. We're going to put provolone cheese down first. Okay. And then we're using thin slices because we don't need a lot of cheese. It's not necessary. And we'll see what we get out of the end part here. Alright. And don't worry about them being exactly even. Now next on the list, we're going to add our hot dogs. Now we're using Vienna Hot Dogs, and we toss them in Bullseye original barbecue sauce. And the reason I chose this one is because it's thick. And what will happen is when these roast off, the hot dogs themselves will spit a little bit of water as they get hot and they start to cook. Well, we don't want that to thin down the barbecue sauce, and we certainly don't want to make soup inside of these. So the barbecue sauce being thicker, as it starts to dry out a little bit from being heated, will be re-moistened by the water from the hot dog. Also, too, we're using Vienna hot dogs because this is Chicago and I think it's a law. Alright, we've got 1 more to use, maybe 2. So we'll take this sucker and we will roll him in barbecue sauce and add him to the end. Alright then. Now we're going to take it a step further. We're going to take bacon that we've already cooked in the oven on a sheet pan earlier in yet another segment that we're doing this in. And we're going to put our bacon in here with it. And so each one is going to have its own little stash of bacon, one way or another. And between the bacon and the provolone cheese, we're going to have ourselves a pretty good eating food here. This is a great snack. This can actually even be made into a lunch by itself because we're using half hot dogs for each one. So if you put 4 of these in the oven, matched it up with, say, for example, some tater tots or some onion rings, whatever you may have on hand, you have yourself a nice little lunch. Now, next on the list, what we're going to do is we're going to cut this up. Use a pizza wheel cutter. If you use a knife, you'll drag it through the dough, and that will be a problem. See how nice and even that cuts? And then we're going to come back and we're going to do it again. Alright, now next on the list, to make sure this works out as well as it can, we're just going to do one side with eggs. That's going to be the side that we seal it. And then over here as well too. You can see that this gets done literally in just a couple of minutes, and there's not very much prep work involved in doing something like this. Basically, the only thing that you have to do is cook the bacon. Now what we'll do here is roll this and then pinch it, and we're all set. And very simple and to the point. Seam is on the bottom. Okay, now we go in the opposite direction because that's where the egg wash is. Now if you want extra barbecue sauce, when they come out of the oven, dip them. No problem at all. Put it on the inside, it'll have a tendency to bust through seams, caramelize, maybe even scorch and burn because of the oven. So I don't recommend it. And Simple and to the point. Try and keep your hands clean when you're doing this, so you don't have any issues with sauce or anything else being on the outside. And just like that, we're done. What we're going to do is you're going to literally taper the edges. You can do this with a fork, and you can actually even just do it with your fingers, because all you're doing is pressing them close together. Either way will work. All right then. And take a fork, pinch the edges so they stay closed and together. Ambidextrous, we go to the other hand. If only I could have done that throwing a baseball. Whoa. And just like that, we're done. They're ready for the oven. We're going to pop a couple in the oven, and then it's eating time. Out of the oven and on the plate. It takes about maybe 15 to 20 minutes, depending on your oven. 375. Notice the nice golden brown color. We gave it a simple egg wash basting. Put it up onto baking paper so it doesn't stick, and you're all set and ready to rock and roll. Freezes extremely well, and you can put it into the oven frozen. Not a problem. And the ends are not thick and heavy with dough, so they just literally melt in your mouth and disappear when you bite in.